example we're going to look at with a quadratic formula is negative x squared minus 2x minus 6 equals 0. So we're going to use the quadratic formula to find the solutions to this equation. And like always, our first step to do this is to figure out a, b, and c so that we can plug them into our formula. So a is our number in front of x squared. So when we look in front of x squared here, we just have this negative. But anytime we have just that negative, we still have, remember we call it that understood 1 out in front. So negative 1 is going to be a. Then b is our number that comes in front of x, that coefficient. So b in this problem is negative 2. And finally, c is our constant, the number without a variable. So in this problem, c is negative 6. So now that we know all of those numbers, we can take them and plug them into the formula. So x equals negative b, so negative 2. So even though b was negative here, we still include the negative in front of b a second time because it's negative b. So it's going to change that sign, negative 2. Plus or minus the square root of b squared, which is negative 2 squared, minus 4ac, so minus 4 times a, which in this problem is negative 1, times c, which in this problem is negative 6. And then that's all over 2 times a, which is negative 1. Then we're going to go through and simplify. So this time, when we start with negative 2, we actually can simplify that. We normally don't write two negatives next to each other. When we have a negative beside another negative, we know that that means we can change that to a positive. So negative 2 is going to switch to positive 2. Plus or minus the square root of, and then we're going to go through and simplify what's in our square root. So negative 2 squared means negative 2 times negative 2, so that's going to give us a positive 4. So negative 2 squared is 4. Then we have negative 4 times negative 1 times negative 6. So if we go through one step at a time to do that multiplication, negative 4 times negative 1 is positive 4. Positive 4 times negative 6 is negative 24. So we have a minus 24 all over 2 times negative 1 gives us a negative 2. And then we can go through and once again continue to simplify. So we start with our 2. We can't do anything with that right now. So 2 plus or minus the square root of, and inside our square root we have 4 minus 24. And when we do that subtraction, we get negative 20. So inside our square root, we have a negative 20 for our radicand. And then on the bottom, in our denominator, we still have this negative 2. So now, when we look at the square root of negative 20, there's two things we need to notice here. First, we want to figure out if we can take the square root of that number. We don't know the square root of 20 off the top of our heads. It's not a perfect square, so we're going to have to do our factor tree with 20. But then we also have that negative in our square root. And when we have that negative in the square root, we get an imaginary number. So we know when we go through and simplify that square root, we're going to rewrite it as an imaginary number, which we'll do after we do our factor tree. So over here to the side, we're going to do our factor tree with 20 to try and figure out what multiplies to equal 20. So 4 and 5 multiply to equal 20. 5 is prime, so we stop with the 5, but 4 is not. So two numbers that multiply to equal 4 are 2 and 2. 2 and 2 are both prime, so we stop with those. And then since we're trying to take the square root, we're going to look for groups of 2 of the same number. So in this factor tree, we have 2 2's. So I'll circle those. So when I go to rewrite this expression and simplify, I still have 2 plus or minus. I circled a group of 2's, so I'm going to bring a 2 out in front of the square root. But there was one other thing I said. Since we're taking the square root of a negative 20, because it's negative in the square root, we get an imaginary number. So to rewrite this so that we don't have a negative in the square root, outside of our square root, we bring out a letter I. And that letter I stands for the square root of that negative part. So anytime there's a negative in the square root, you rewrite it with an I out in front, and whatever's left inside the square root is going to change to a positive. And inside of our square root, we had a 5 left over that we couldn't simplify. So we'll have a 5 inside of our square root all over negative 2. So we end up with 2 plus or minus 2i square root of 5 over negative 2. And you could try and simplify this using a common factor since we've got several 2's in here. If you do, that's okay, but I'm also good with you stopping right here.